Something's wrong with that kid. His head don't work, it never did. You better not cross his path. He's a chain-smoking alcoholic sociopath. Jail wasn't so bad, thought Kevin. Especially since he spent most days just sitting around drinking prison-made booze and smoking, which was pretty much all he did when he wasn't in prison anyway. It was Friday, and that meant Kevin had another appointment with Mr. Franklin, the prison psychiatrist. The guard came to get Kevin and take him to Mr. Franklin's office. Kevin didn't much like the looks of him and figured it might be fun to kick him in the sternum, but the guard put shackles on his feet. Guards were quick learners, thought Kevin.
I apologize for the shackles, Kevin, but I'm afraid some of my colleagues remain unenlightened as to the nature of your mental health. It's as if they expect you're just going to suddenly jump up or attack one of them. Now, let's get right back into our last session. You were telling me about Allan.
Kevin was in grade 5. He didn't much care for school, but his mom and dad made him go because the government had passed a law against truancy that could send the parents to jail if they didn't make their kids stay in school. Most of all, Kevin hated gym class. He wasn't very good at sports because he smoked a pack a day and because he was usually pretty cranked on prescription cough syrup and had trouble focusing on objects. Kevin was always the last one picked for every team. One Monday morning, Kevin figured he'd had enough and decided to skip gym class altogether. Instead of going, he hid between some cars in the teacher's parking lot and smoked. Then he finished off the bottle of vodka he'd stolen from his neighbor's liquor cabinet. Pretty soon, Kevin got bored. He thought busting out the taillights and snapping off the aerials on all the teachers' cars might help. Kevin had fun, but when he was done, he was still bored. Kevin thought maybe he might just be lonely. Then something strange happened.
I am the god of hellfire, risen to savage my revenge against all the pitiful souls of those who have betrayed the kingdom of Kevin. Come on, let's set them cars on fire.
Kevin was a little confused. This was the first time any of the things in his head had ever talked to him. Kevin wondered what the goose wanted.
I have risen in servitude as a soldier in the army of glorious vengeance. Retribution shall be ours, said Allan the magic goose.
Kevin had never heard of a magic goose before, and because it was all in his head, he wondered if it was just the booze talking.
It ain't just the booze, master. I'm your imaginary friend, which means you're halfway crazy no matter which way you come at it. I'm Allan. Allan the magic goose. Now how's about that fire?
Kevin wasn't sure if he liked the idea of being crazy, but he sure liked the fire idea. Allan was Kevin's very first friend. Kevin had always hoped for a real friend, but none of the other kids his age enjoyed the same things Kevin did, like drinking cough syrup and hitting things. Allan sure did, though. Kevin decided he'd start going back to gym class because Allan told him that if he didn't stand up to the other kids, then he'd have to spend the rest of his life taking crap from people like he was a worthless, dumb piece of trash, just like his dad.
All right, ladies, it's doubles badminton day, so pick a partner.
No one wanted to be Kevin's partner, which was fine by him because he'd already decided to play with Allan. Mr. Carson handed out the badminton rackets. He made a big joke in front of everyone about giving a racket to Kevin's imaginary friend. All the kids laughed.
Fret not thyself because of evildoers, neither be thou envious against the workers of iniquity, for they shall be cut down like the grass and wither like the green herb.
Kevin wasn't up on his psalms, and he didn't understand a lot of the big words, so he just stood there paralyzed with self-conscious fear. Kevin sure wished he could just fit in, but because he was genetically devoid of the ability to tell right from wrong, that wasn't real likely to happen.
Think fast, Spencer!
That pretty much put an end to wanting to fit in.
If you and me get it on, crazy man.
Kevin learned a new lesson that day. If you hit people with a badminton racket, they stop teasing you right quick. Kevin also learned that the gym teacher could pick him up all the way off the ground with one hand. Kevin figured some things were more fun to learn than others. The principal suspended Kevin for a week, which was fine by Kevin because that opened up a whole lot more time in his schedule to do the fun things he enjoyed. That night at midnight, Kevin told his parents he was going out for a while. But because they were both already passed out from playing caps, neither one of them heard him. Kevin figured this was for the best, because it also meant they wouldn't hear him going through their wallets and the liquor cabinet. Kevin snuck over to the gym teacher's house to see how many hands it would take for Mr. Carson to put out the garden shed fire Kevin had started to light his smoke.
Superb.
Kevin was in the exercise yard looking at the pictures in a True Detective magazine because he'd never really bothered to learn how to read. Most of the other inmates were lifting weights or playing games because it helped to pass the time.
Watch this, fellas. Think fast, Spencer! I remember when he used to come home crying like a sissy because the kids at school done that to him all the time.
Dad didn't like being shown up in front of his friends. He figured on giving his son one damn holy ass whooping just to straighten things out. But before he could reach the boy, the exercise yard suddenly fell silent. Everyone turned to see what was going on. It was Pete Lefty Wilcox's first day in maximum security prison. He'd been arrested quite a few other times, but because he had multiple personality disorder, he usually served his sentence in a facility for the criminally insane. This time, though, he'd fooled the lawyers and judges into thinking he was cured so he could serve his time in the same prison as Kevin. Pete loved Kevin and had been following him for years because he thought Kevin was the Messiah. Anytime Pete saw something that he felt threatened his savior, he tried to destroy it. Kevin's dad remembered the day he learned that lesson the hard way. Slappy didn't know about Pete either. Slappy was still real upset about having his prison cell set on fire, and he decided he'd knock some sense into Kevin for wrecking his stuff.
Relief Pete.
For someone who thought he was an 18-year-old exotic dancer named Brandy Love, Pete sure could throw a punch. Slappy was out cold before he hit the ground. Kevin's dad laughed so hard he wet his pants, which happened to him a lot because the years of drinking had pretty much destroyed most of the control he had over his bodily functions. The guards came and took Slappy to the prison hospital and then sent all of the other prisoners back to their cells. Everyone was pretty mad at Pete for wrecking their fun, but no one said anything because Pete was so large and violently insane. Kevin liked having Pete around, mostly because Pete would do whatever Kevin and Allan told him to, which meant that Kevin would never have to buy smokes again. As soon as all the other prisoners learned about Pete's devotion, they started treating Kevin a whole lot differently. It was the first time in his life that Kevin had ever been popular, so he decided to exploit the power and seize control of the black market trade in prison. Pretty soon, Kevin was making himself a nice chunk of change. This made Kevin's dad real happy. He figured he'd get a cut because he was family. Kevin wasn't too keen on the idea of sharing his money and smokes, so later that night, he decided to introduce his dad to one of Pete's other personalities, Mistress Esmeralda.
You're a real handsome man, Percy.
Pete Wilcox took a leave of absence from seminary school to join the Vietnam War because he felt it was the least he owed to God and his country. The war was real horrible, and Pete had a lot of difficulty dealing with the senseless bloodletting and the homesickness. Pretty soon, Pete developed several other personalities because of the stress. All the marijuana and LSD probably had something to do with it too, but try telling Pete that. When Pete came home from the war, it seemed like most people weren't too happy to see him.
You murderer!
Baby killer!
There will be no tambourine song for you.
Pete spent the next few years drifting aimlessly around the country with his Bible and his fractured mind.
And Paul said unto Jeremiah, you can't put your luggage there because that's where Maurice Chevalier keeps his waffles. And then God smote them all about the head just because he felt like it.
One day, Pete was going through the women's lingerie rack of a discount clothing store looking for an outfit for Brandy to wear to an audition at a local strip joint when he was spotted by a fashion designer. The designer took one look at Pete and offered him a contract to work as a before picture model. A few weeks later, the designer thought it would be really funny to put Pete in a real runway fashion show. The paparazzi loved him, and Vogue magazine declared him a breath of fresh air. Pretty soon, Pete was in demand as a high-priced supermodel.
Gorgeous, Pete. More pout, more pout. Petey's sad. Such a sad boy. Fabulous. The camera with your lover. You haven't seen her in months. She comes closer. Make love to me, Pete. Now is the time you lay me down in the tall grass and do your stuff.
Pete didn't much care for modeling, but he sure liked having all that money. A smart man could have invested what he made and lived off it for the rest of his life. But because Pete was crazy from the war and hooked on weight loss pills, he pretty much blew it all by having his mobile home gold-plated. Then one day, the last thread holding Pete's fragile mind together snapped, and his whole career came crashing down like a cheap house of cards. At first, Pete didn't much care, but then he got to missing the limelight of being a supermodel, so he took the whole staff of a JCPenney outlet hostage at gunpoint and made them watch as he tried on the entire Young Miss Spring line and paraded up and down the aisle of the store. The judge and all the lawyers at his trial agreed that Pete was mentally incompetent and should be locked in an institution for criminally insane violent offenders and put on a constant supply of lithium.
Okay, anyone got a knife I can borrow? Oh, a knife. Okay, come on, anyone. Son of a bitch. Okay, how about some rope? I'll make a deal with you. Whoever gives me the rope, I won't strangle with it. I'm not saying I won't strangle you, just that I won't do it with the rope.
I'm a little teapot, short and stout. Here is my handle, here is my spout. When you heat me up, you hear me shout.
The metal plate in my head is a really big computer chip planted by the government so they can monitor my dreams and prevent me from assuming my rightful place as the all-knowing commander of the universe!
Pete was a little edgy during his first week in the institution because his body was trying to make the transition from a dependency on diet pills to a dependency on lithium. One of his counselors thought it might help if Pete returned to his seminary studies. But because Pete was too jacked up on lithium to focus on the words, one of the orderlies read the Bible to him.
I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, saith the Lord, which is, and which was, and which is to come, the Almighty.
Hi, Jesus Christ, I'm Pete. Most of the time, anyway.
Kevin was pretty sure the big cross-dressing man was even crazier than he was. But because he seemed willing to do whatever Kevin told him to, Allan figured it was a pretty good deal. It was also right around that time that Pete was diagnosed with narcolepsy. Now that Slappy was laid up, Allan commanded Kevin to seize control of the black market trade in prison. Kevin had never been in charge of anything before, and he was kind of nervous. But Kevin found out right quick that people will do just about anything you ask them to if you're polite and have a violent friend as big as Pete who will do whatever you tell him to because his head doesn't work right and he thinks you're Jesus Christ. Allan told Kevin that from now on, he was calling all the shots.
Name and who you're here to see, please?
Anastasia Spencer, here to see Percy and Kevin Spencer.
Charlie Plunt, same.
Sign here. I'll have to check your purse, ma'am.
What for?
Contraband, weapons, that type of thing. You as well, sir. Empty your pockets. I'll have to keep this stuff here. You can pick it up on your way out. Have a nice day.
That's it?
All taken care of. Next.
Jeez, who's a lady gotta sleep with to get a cavity search around here? What a ripoff.
Don't tell Kevin you gave me any smoke.
Where's my boy? You keeping an eye on him like I said, ain't you? I don't want to see him falling in with the wrong crowd. He's still young. He's still got his whole life ahead of him.
He ain't no good, that one. His head's broken or something. We should have kept the other one and give him up.
Hey, Percy.
Charlie, you old dog, how's it hanging?
Not too shabby.
You still putting all them notches on your bedpost? Or is old age slowing you down some?
Well, you know, little bit here, little bit there. Adds up some, I guess. How about you? You getting any?
Look, I don't know what Kevin told you about me and that freak Pete.
Kevin sent Mistress Esmeralda for a visit, didn't he?
Mom and Charlie thought this was really funny, and they spent a good long time laughing at Dad.
So, now that you're Pete's bitch, you're gonna want a divorce?
Kevin's old man didn't like to be made fun of, and he aimed to fix the problem right quick. But because he was still so sore, he couldn't move very fast, which was probably for the best, because Kevin and Pete had just walked in, and the old man wasn't in the market for any more punishment.
I hear you're doing real good, boy. I always knew you'd make something of yourself.
Kevin and his mom caught up on old times. Dad was still real mad at Kevin, so he didn't say a word. Kevin didn't much care for the silent treatment, and Dad was really starting to get on his nerves. So he figured he'd bribe the warden and get the old man paroled, just to get him out of his hair for a couple of months, which was pretty much as long as the dumb bastard had ever been able to stay out of prison. Kevin and his dad had joined the Cub Scouts because the court had ordered the old man to start taking better care of the boy and doing more family-oriented things. The judge said if he didn't, Kevin would be removed from his home and placed in foster care.
Where do we sign up?
If Kevin goes, so does your child support from welfare.
The old man didn't like the sounds of that too much, because that was the money he'd set aside for lottery tickets and lap dances.
I hope everyone remembered to be prepared. Just a little Cub Scout humor. I'd also like to take this opportunity to welcome our newest father and son. Hopefully they'll find the cubbing experience as rewarding as we all have. This is Percy Spencer and his little boy Kevin.
Daddy, the new man scares me.
Oh, Mr. Spencer, I'm afraid our canoe trip is a no-smoking voyage. Only you can prevent forest fires. All the rules were clearly outlined in the pamphlet.
I ain't never learned how to read.
Oh, that's too bad. So anyway, there's going to be 2 dads and 2 sons in each canoe. We chose to draw numbers to decide everyone's canoe buddies for the first day. So when I call your name, go stand beside the canoe number you're assigned to.
None of the other Cub Scouts or their fathers wanted to be in the same canoe as Kevin and his dad. Eventually they drew straws, and Mr. Peterson and his son Gary lost. Things went pretty well for about 10 minutes. Then Kevin and his dad decided canoeing was too damn much work and kicked back to share a bottle of gin and a smoke.
Dad, Kevin and his dad aren't paddling, and they're smoking too.
Mr. Peterson started to give Kevin's dad a lecture. The old man wasn't much in a mood for a good talking to, so he hit Mr. Peterson in the knee with his canoe paddle. Kevin's old man had really wanted to bust him a sweet one across the head, but he figured if Mr. Peterson was knocked out, then he'd have to paddle. Gary kinda let the whole equal workload issue slide after that. That night they set up camp on a beach beside the lake. Mr. Peterson and Gary set up the Spencer tent because they didn't want to get hit again. Then everyone gathered around the hibachi to cook dinner. It looked like a lot of work, and since Kevin didn't much care for that kind of thing, he was real glad his dad had brought along a bucket of chicken. All the others stared at them like they were idiots, but no one said anything because they all saw how bad Mr. Peterson was limping. After dinner, everyone cleaned up their plates and did the dishes. Kevin and his dad were done first because all they had to do was throw their empty bucket, plastic cutlery, and styrofoam plates into the woods. While they were waiting for the others to finish, they got real good and drilled on the rest of their gin and smoked half a pack of unfiltered cigarettes. When it got dark, the scout leader started a campfire by rubbing 2 sticks together. Kevin's dad thought it was really funny.
Why don't you use a lighter, you effing bonehead?
Mr. Spencer, I'm going to have to ask you again to please watch your language in front of the children.
Hey, pal, unless you want to be walking like Mr. Peterson, you best shut your hole.
Once the fire was going, everyone sat around roasting marshmallows and taking turns telling scary stories.
And when she got out of the car, she saw that her boyfriend was hanging from a tree, and that noise she heard was his fingernails scraping across the roof of the car.
The police called and told the woman that they had traced the call and that it was coming from inside her house.
That's nothing. You want to hear scary?
Kevin's dad waited until he had everyone's attention, and all you could hear were the crickets. Then he told everyone about the first time he was arrested and strip searched by a border guard.
Well, that's it for tonight. Good night, everybody.
They ain't never gonna learn if you don't tell them.
The next morning, Kevin and his dad slept off their hangovers while all the others packed. When Kevin and his dad finally got up, the scout leader told them that he had decided to cut the trip short and that they were all going home. Kevin was sad because it was the most fun he had ever had in his life. But the old man was real happy because if they hurried, he could still make happy hour at the Piece of Tail Lap Dancing Emporium.